Hi, everybody. My name is Mary Beth Graybert. I work here at MSU. I'm with the Land Policy Institute on campus. It's an institute that does research and outreach and applied research in policy arenas around land use issues and how they impact things like our economy, our health, our quality of life. So that's the kind of research that I've been doing. Then we also take the research into communities. We do trainings for legislators in the state, for policymakers at the regional and the local level. So that's a little bit about what we're about.
And by the way, I should thank you very much because all the arrangements that you see is done by Mary Beth, basically.
Thank you. Only the good ones, the bad ones. Jan's been really good. We worked well as a team, so I'm glad things are going well so far. I hope they continue to go well. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit today about a study, actually two studies that we've been working on, and my colleague Yue may come into the room in a little bit. She has been working with me on the study. She'll be able to share some of the more technical stuff. Mine is a little more 30,000 feet, I guess. So the studies that we've been working on have been here in the city of Lansing, and we've been looking at rebuilding Lansing neighborhoods and using different tools for disposing of vacant property in the city that have helped to revitalize some of the neighborhoods here. And the research that we're doing in particular is to evaluate the economic impacts that those tools have had in the communities so that we can help the county to justify further investments in those programs. So are you all fairly familiar with the U.S. housing crisis? Have they talked about that in other sessions?
Yeah, I regular taxation system.
Okay. So around 2007, we ran into some problems with mortgages in the United States. There were a lot of, sorry, do I need to talk up? So there were a lot of people who couldn't really afford their mortgages, and housing prices were declining, and so that created a lot of foreclosure in many cities in the United States. And that was particularly true here in Michigan and in other cities like Detroit, where we already had a lack of population in some of those bigger cities. We lost a lot of people because we lost a lot of jobs in the automotive industry, and so our city cores emptied out. And what that's resulted in is the people who live in those cities are paying the legacy costs for this infrastructure for a much bigger population. So their water bills are really high, their taxes are really high, and a lot of them can't afford to live in those houses. So we've seen a lot of mortgage foreclosures. People couldn't afford their mortgages, but we've also seen tax delinquency and foreclosures as a result of people not paying their taxes. And so that's kind of the birthplace of these tools. So we definitely saw that reflected in what we call the Great Recession in the United States. And of course, there was a lot of global economic decline at that point as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about some of the recent research that we've done. I'm going to talk to you about the tools and explain those a little bit. And I'm very curious to see if you have similar issues in the cities where you live or similar tools to deal with some of those issues. Okay, so I started to talk about the national mortgage crisis a little bit. The negative externalities that are associated with that foreclosure, one would expect. We see even further reduced property prices, reduced tax base, so we're not able to provide services to the people who remain, out-migration. So it's basically a slippery slope where we start losing people and then we just lose more and more because we're getting a lower quality of life in the cities. Excuse me. We see increased crime, and we see disrupted social ties, particularly in those neighborhoods that have a high rate of vacancy where they're really emptying out. There are some places in the city of Detroit where the vacancy rates are like 80%. There are just a very few people living in some of those houses. Some of those structures have been torn down, and you did get to take a tour. Did you get to see any of the neighborhoods that they call them bombed out, where there's like 10 houses on a block that used to have 100? Yeah, they're really a stark, I think, reminder of the decline of some of these cities. And you'll see neighborhoods in Detroit that are coming back very well, but there's still a lot of pockets of that high vacancy. So in order to combat that problem, we had that issue here in Lansing, not to the extent that Detroit did, but in order to deal with all of this vacant property, that vacant property after tax foreclosures occur goes back to the county or the taxing body. So in some cases that's the municipality, in some cases it's the county. And so they have to decide what to do with that. In some cases they just hold on to it for a long time, which isn't really helpful for the market. It helps to further depress the property prices in those neighborhoods. And then they get the complaints, people think that the government is hoarding land and therefore, trying to manipulate prices. So a couple of the ways that they've come up with for dealing with this issue is land banking. So they have a stock of houses, and they determine the neighborhoods in which it might do some good to revitalize those houses and put them back into the market. In some cases, they're demolishing the houses because they're just in too bad of shape to try to fix them up and sell them again. But the land banking activity, they maintain those properties so it looks like somebody lives there, and then in a lot of cases they'll renovate them. Then they sell them to people at lower income levels. They are required to live in those homes. They can't buy them and rent to people, and they're required to maintain those homes. And they take over the mortgages. They take over the mortgages for those homes, and then they live there. So it's really nice because it gets the houses back into the market. It gets people into the homes, so they take care of them. And then it also adds to the tax base. So that's where land banking came from. I'm curious to see, do your cities have issues of vacancy, and do you have tools to deal with vacancy that are similar to land banking? No.
In Guadalajara, we have a lot. Yes, there's a problem also in Mexico right now. Now I don't know what we are doing about, but we have the same problem in the suburbs, I think, and we have now like 40% of vacancy.
In Guadalajara, 20.
In all cities in Mexico, there's a problem. In all the principal cities. I think that it's an amazing amount of cities that has vacancy.
Do you know what happens to those vacant properties? Like who owns them, or do they just
Now nobody, because they were for the people for low income, and they stop paying, and
so they just
sometimes they only leave it. Maybe the bank owns. The bank can, I think.
Right.
And some of them were constructed very away from the downtown, so people need that.
Just abandon them. Yeah.
What about the downtown? Because I remember walking to the downtown and there were quite a lot of houses, very fancy houses, which were vacant, and they said it's because of the insecurity.
And especially in Guadalajara now we have that trouble because the downtown is being abandoned by the people, and we are trying to do that. The same thing you do here, they return the people to the downtown by changing the land use, and we don't have permission for the building construction in the downtown. Now they are changing the plans for make this redensity thing.
So is it successful? Are people moving back in?
We are in the process.
Yeah. I'm curious, in terms of housing prices, is it more expensive, or maybe just the cost? So the housing price, the taxes, the utilities in the city, is it more expensive than outside of the city? Or vice versa?
They are trying to, the part of the plan is change this taxation, but the problem is that the Mexican, like here in US, have the same thinking of I need a big property, and we don't like to live in flats. So that's part of the culture change we are passed through.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think that that's happened in the United States over the last 50 years, where people have wanted to move out and have bigger homes. They didn't want to have urban living, but that's changing. So there's the trend where people are moving back into the cities and they want density. There's a lot of reasons for it, I think. There's higher gas prices, so we're all very wed to our cars, but as the gas prices rise, they probably get more like they are in Europe, but to us it's expensive. Yeah, they're higher everywhere else. So I think that's one of the things. But the major thing I think is millennials, the young age group, they want to be in a place where there's lots of variety, lots of entertainment, and that just can't happen in the suburbs the way it does in the urban areas. And that's a huge portion of our population, so it's really driving some of these trends. We also have what they call baby boomers. I don't know. Okay, so that's also a huge population, and they have wanted to. There are people who are retiring age. They're like 55 and over. The reason they call them baby boomers is because after World War II, what's that?
The sons of the ones who lived the crisis.
Yeah, who lived through the World War II, the children of the World War II veterans. And when they came back from the war, they made a bunch of babies. So that's why they call it the baby boom.
Baby boom.
And so those folks are also wanting to move into urban areas where they have easy access to the arts and culture, to walkability, recreation, to hospitals. So they need to be near medicine. So a lot of those things are encouraging this trend. I don't think we're seeing that as starkly in Michigan. People they really like their cars, and our infrastructure is built such that people live in the suburbs. So it's really hard to get people back in. My husband and I are buying a house, and we live in Lansing. We live in the city now, but we're moving out to the suburbs because the schools are so much better there, and that's true all over Michigan. So people are continuing to move out. That trend is taking a lot longer in Michigan.
And how the government is taking care of the services and all the things that you need in the suburbs? They raise the taxes?
Well, it's interesting because there are a lot of studies that show that providing those services in the suburban areas is more expensive because it's more pipe, it's more, but it's still in some ways cheaper because they're building new, so everything is in good shape. They don't have to work on the maintenance as much as you do in the urban core, where things become dilapidated, and that's definitely true in U.S. cities, in Michigan in particular, where we haven't taken good care of the infrastructure, and therefore it's starting to fall apart. So it's costing more for the people who live in those urban areas. It is cheaper. The property taxes are lower in the suburbs, generally speaking, although that's changing somewhat too. So there's a lot going on right now that I think will influence where people are going. So the other tool that we use, and I should mention, we talked about the foreclosures. So the mortgage foreclosures often go back to the bank, but the tax foreclosures will go back to the municipal government. So the other way that they've been disposing of those lands is through the tax auction process. So they have, hundreds of properties that have been foreclosed. They put them up for auction, and the minimum bid is the taxes that are in arrears. So it's usually 3 years of taxes. So say they owe $20,000 on their home, that's the minimum bid for the auction. And then it's possible that it could bring more money back to the city. And then the third one that I'm going to talk about just a little bit today is blight and elimination. There's a lot of federal funding going to the states right now for eliminating some of the blight in cities like Detroit, basically just taking down structures that are dilapidated and are just an eyesore and that are bringing down property values. And we're finding that could have a positive value in those neighborhoods. So the research that we did, we worked with Ingham County, which encompasses Lansing and East Lansing. They wanted to know what the economic impact of the land bank and the property tax auctions are. They want to know this because they want to be able to justify the investments in these programs, but also they want to be able to compare them. So is putting money into the land banks a better bet or better gamble than putting money into the tax auction process? This is a fairly new research process. We haven't seen a lot of economic impact analysis for vacant land disposition. And so there are a lot of folks who are doing this type of work who have their eyes on these studies to see what the results are going to be. the questions that we ask are, what is the effect of these activities on nearby property sales prices? We use that as a proxy for economic impacts. Then we also we took a look at the total economic impacts of the sales, the demolition, construction, renovation, and maintenance activities on the regional economy. So how many jobs did it create? How much money did it put back into the regional economy? That sort of thing. And then finally, we looked at a comparison between the land bank and the tax auctions. So land banking is actually not a very new tool, but it's been around since the 1960s, but it's being used more because we have these vacant property issues than it has been in the last 40 years. So since 2006, when the Ingham County Land Bank was established, they've acquired over 900 properties. They've demolished 142 of those. They've rebuilt 132 of them, and they've resold 116 properties. And some folks in the city say, well, why haven't you renovated and put back more on the market? Well, it's expensive. They actually did get a lot of federal funding to do this renovation of these properties, and they've been able to get a lot more onto the tax rolls. They still have a lot more work to do. But they have been successful in bringing in $10 million from the land bank activities back into revenues, tax revenues.
Can I
And
please ask?
yes,
What's the logic between taking the homes of people who cannot pay their taxes, but then spending federal funding to the bank that took the houses? So instead of, for example, I don't know if you look into that issue, but it just struck me. It's punitive basically.
Right.
Public money is still being spent. It's actually spent, so not only the state doesn't help the people to, recover and thus being able to pay their taxes, so it doesn't receive the taxes, and then gets properties on which it spends money. And does the money go to is it land by public?
it goes back into reinvestment. So it'll be reinvested into another county.
To the state?
It's the county, so it's a local government. But it gets reinvested in the program. And I do understand what you're asking. And there are other federal and state programs for helping people stay in their homes. So helping them avoid foreclosure. And the foreclosure process takes 3 years. So they do try to work with people in that time frame to keep them in their homes. But yeah, that is the process. And that was beyond the scope of what we're looking at. But I think it's a good question to ask. So the activities that the land bank has been doing, I think, have done a lot for some of these neighborhoods that have been bombed out in terms of making them look like people live there. It's helped, I think, to maintain some of the property values and help the people who continue to live there to feel like they're living in a neighborhood that's not completely vacant. So this is the LIV review that we did. I mentioned that this is somewhat of a new study, but there have been people who have been looking at the issue of foreclosure and blight and how that's impacting property prices. So there was a study in Dallas in Texas that saw that for properties that were within 200 feet of a blighted property, their value of their home was $1,700 lower. In Genesee County, which is where Flint is, the properties there that were within 500 feet of a blighted property were about 2.27% lower. And then finally in Philadelphia, which is also another legacy city that's had a lot of problems with vacancy, properties within 150 feet saw a $7,600 reduction in the value of their homes. So these are, pretty substantial. There is definitely a distance factor. The closer that you are to a blighted property, the more the impact you see. And generally within 500 feet is where we've seen the most impact. So I'm going to talk now about the hedonic analysis, the property price analysis that we did, and some of the results that we found. So is anyone familiar with hedonic analysis? Did you do regression analysis? No. Okay. Just want to see where folks are coming from. So basically we use hedonic analysis to break down the price of a property. So if you look at a house, a bedroom is worth so much, the number of stories is worth so much, the backyard is worth so much. And so it breaks it down into those different components. And if we add something like a property that's blighted within 500 feet, that can also be reflected in the price of the home. So it tells us how much more people are willing to pay for a house that has certain features, that's in a certain neighborhood. And when people vote with their wallets, because we're looking at the actual prices they pay, we think they're telling the truth. Rather than a survey where we ask them, well, how much is this worth to you? They could tell us whatever they feel. But if they're actually paying money, then we know that's probably pretty important to them. So using Hadanis, we estimated the effect of a demolished or renovated land bank property within a certain distance of a home. This is a map of the city of Lansing. And basically what we took for our observations is we looked at 23 land bank properties that had a number of property sales around them within the time frame that we were looking at, which was 2006 to 2012. We looked at those that were renovated by the land bank and then put back into the market. We looked at the properties that were sold within 1,000 feet of those properties, and then we ran this regression analysis. We basically have to have a lot of information about each of the properties. We need to know the number of bedrooms, the square footage, how many bathrooms, the yard. And then we also look at the socioeconomic factors of the people who live in that neighborhood. Is it lower income? Is it mixed race? That kind of thing. And all of those things go into this model. This is actually the regression model, but if you don't do this, this probably is not very interesting to you. But I will say that we used what we call dummy variables to tell us which neighborhood each of these properties was in, because different neighborhoods have, some are very well-to-do and some are not. And so that kind of helped us with the comparables. And then we looked at whether the house was sold before or after land bank renovation took place. And that was the target variable that we were looking at. So what we found in the analysis is that there was a positive and significant relationship between sale price and square footage of a home, between sale price and the number of bathrooms. And those things tell us that our regression analysis is probably pretty good because it's consistent with other studies that have been done in the past. We also saw the sale prices follow the trend that we've seen in the market, which is basically they were increasing till around 2005, and then we hit that rocky period. And then after 2008, we've seen a lot of decline. Just in the past couple of years, we've started to see prices go up again, so that's encouraging. We also found that rental properties had a 10% lower price than owner-occupied homes, all else remaining equal. And what that tells us is that the land bank has a policy where they only allow owners to purchase properties. They won't let you buy it and then rent it out. So at least that policy has been good for property values within the neighborhoods where they've been working. On the flip side, we found a negative relationship between the sale price of a home and the presence of a property that's slated for demolition. So it's blighted, but it hasn't been demolished yet, within 1,000 feet of the home. So if the home sale occurred before the demolition, when there was blight, it was 11.5% lower. Then we found that property values within 1,000 feet of a renovated or new land bank home, sometimes they pull them down and build a new one, were 9.5% lower, which we would expect because it's been a blighted neighborhood. But the properties that were within 500 feet of a land bank renovation actually were 5.2% higher. So we are seeing a positive impact of the land bank's activities in these areas. So the second part of that analysis was what we call an implant analysis. It's an input-output economic model. Basically, the information that we put in is the spending that occurred on these land bank properties, and it's a model that uses information from the region to kick out output. So it tells us how many jobs were created, how much income was created through those jobs, and how much GDP was created. It tells us what the direct effect is, so how many people were actually hired to work on the properties, and then also the indirect effect. So if people were hired, then they're going to spend their money at the grocery stores, they're going to go and see the doctor. So it puts more money into the community, and so there are more jobs as a result of that. We call those indirect and induced impacts. So the spending categories that we looked at were maintenance and repair of the properties, services, electrical, power generation, utilities that were paid by the land bank, water, sewage, and other treatment, and then like closing costs and things like that. So the total estimated direct and indirect economic impact was $56 million. The total spending was $31 million. So we see a leveraging of $1.8 for every dollar that was spent. It goes into the regional economy. So the economic benefit is hopefully worth the investment. And then the number of jobs that were created were 232 jobs, with 194 being induced or indirect. 232 direct jobs, and then 426 overall. So that was the land bank. Does anybody have any questions about the land bank before I move on to the tax auction one? So the land bank we did a couple of years ago. This tax auction one we just finished up. So they're not terribly comparable because they're different time frames, but they do allow us, I think, to do some comparisons between the programs. So properties, as I mentioned earlier, that have been foreclosed because they haven't paid their taxes or because they haven't paid special assessments, they go into the tax auction. And the price that they start at is the taxes that are owed. Similar to the land bank, some of the properties that are sold with what they call a restrictive covenant. So that means that the person who buys it has to live in it, but not all of them are that way, and a lot of them become rentals. So between 2008 and 2013, which is the period we were looking at, they sold like 300 properties to the tax auction. They're able to sell more properties, but obviously at a much lower rate than they would be able to sell the land bank properties. So, we talked earlier about the migration of people from the industrial cities and the fact that the tax base is now becomes the burden of the poorest residents who were not able to move out. So the mortgage foreclosure properties, generally they're considered to have some value because the banks own them. But a lot of the times the tax delinquent properties don't see a lot of value in the market because they tend to become blighted. They're not well taken care of. So during the recession in Detroit, we saw tens of thousands of blighted properties and abandoned properties in the city. And those came back to the county treasurer, similar to how they've done in Ingham County. And they were not able to sell them for $500. They tried in some cases to give them away, and people they didn't want them. I think that may be changing now, but they had a really hard time during this time frame getting rid of some of those properties. And as we talked about before, the tax delinquent foreclosures tended to decrease the value of the homes nearby, especially in the poorer neighborhoods. So that's had an aggravated effect on the neighborhoods that were already not doing very well. So we did a similar analysis where we looked at property prices in Ingham County, so this was a little bit broader. And basically, we talked a little bit earlier about the fact that in city cores in the United States, or at least in Michigan, we've seen because these people are emptying out, the value of those homes is lower than the value of the homes in the suburbs. So you can see the blue is where the city of Lansing is, and then on the right is some red and some yellow. Those are where the higher property prices are in this region. So we used that information to help delineate the neighborhoods so that we could take that comparable effect out of the model and isolate the target factors that we wanted to look at. So this is what we found. The sale of tax foreclosed properties appear to be negatively related to market sales within 500 feet. However, the impact is not really significant, so we weren't able to say statistically that there's a good relationship there. However, when the tax auction properties have been renovated, it does create a positive impact on property prices that are nearby within 500 feet, $3,600. So that actually has had a benefit. And a lot of times these properties need a lot of work. So we have seen that the new owners of these properties are more likely to secure permits to do that work. So 33% of those new owners, as compared to 22% of owners in the market system, will actually secure permits to fix up those houses, and it has a good impact on the rest of the neighborhood. And then similarly, we found in terms of economic impacts, the expenditures in this program are much smaller because they're not renovating the properties, they're just turning them around and selling them, and sometimes maintaining them, right? So they spent about $2.6 million and they brought in about $3 million in revenue. However, the leveraging for that is like $1.2 to 1 spent. So it's lower than we saw with the land bank, but of course the amount of investment is much lower as well. So it depends on what your goal is, right? If you want to try to make a lot of impact with a little investment, this could still be a good way to go. And in terms of a comparison between those two programs, I think it suggests that they both have their value, right? Some of them, the land bank is definitely going to do a lot more for the aesthetics and the quality of life in the neighborhoods where they renovate properties. But at least with the tax auction sales, they're getting the properties back into the tax rolls and back onto the market, which is where capitalism hopefully can help to improve the property prices. So, and because the investments are smaller, it only created 22 jobs and the labor income was only $1 million. So it's much lower than we saw with the land banks. In terms of comparison, auction properties are sometimes looked down upon because they tend to attract speculators, and we've seen that in some of the cities, in particular in Detroit and Flint, where people come in and they buy up the properties and then they just hold on to them, hoping that property values will increase and at some point they'll be able to turn them around and sell them for more. So a study that Marty Dewar did a few years ago found that only 17% of the tax foreclosed housing in Detroit and 12% in Flint became owner-occupied after the tax auction sale. So there was a lot of speculation that was happening there. And there was some, I think some of it's rentals, but I think there's a lot of speculation. And I think that it's very tempting. So there was one buyer in Flint who just bought up like 100 properties. And he sold the ones he could for profit, and the rest of them he just let them go back into tax delinquency. So he wasn't really out anything, but that doesn't help much for the community either. We're not seeing that in Lansing to that extent, so that's good. In Toledo, these researchers found that land bank properties had a higher rate of new development and lower rates of reversion to delinquency than the tax auction sales. So we looked at Lansing, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And in Brooklyn, nearly a quarter of the auction properties returned to delinquency within 7 years. So it does have a benefit of getting back on the tax rolls, but they may fall right back off again. So in Lansing, this is what we've seen in terms of the tax auction properties that returned to foreclosure. Between 2005 and 2009, there was a fairly high percentage of them that went back into delinquency. But after 2010, we're seeing those numbers reduce a lot. And Eric Schertzing, who's the Ingham County Treasurer, thinks that that's a result of, it used to be that tax auction sales occurred at the state level, the state controlled that process, but now it's been decentralized and the local governments take care of that process. So he thinks that since the local governments have taken ownership of that, they're doing a better job of making sure the properties land into the hands of folks who are going to take good care of them. So conclusions, the results show that there's a positive leveraging of the investment that's made through the land bank, even in a down economy, which was surprising to a lot of people. Even in a declining housing market, these land bank renovations are having a positive impact in the communities. So we can't, as I mentioned, we can't make a direct comparison between them, but I think it remains clear that they both have a benefit for the community in terms of putting those vacant properties back into the market. And we should also note that there's a delay generally in the realization of economic impacts, particularly in terms of property price. So this is a very short time frame for the study, and it would be great if we could do a longer analysis to see, what impact is this land bank activity going to have 10 years down the road. So that's one of the future research things that we'll do. I also mentioned the blight elimination program. There's federal funding through the hardest hit fund is what they call it, to help folks stay in their homes, either who are going through mortgage foreclosure or tax foreclosure issues. So there's a lot of money for that. But then Michigan determined and requested from the federal government that they could use some of that funding for blight elimination as opposed to just helping keep people in their homes. because there's so much blight. And so about $500 million has come to Michigan. There are 16 cities that will be using those funds to eliminate some of the blight. Basically, they're just removing structures that are dilapidated. In some cases, they're reusing those materials, but in most cases, they're just getting rid of them. So they've had to come up with strategic plans in terms of where in the city will we use these funds to pull down properties. And of course, everybody has an opinion about which properties should be removed first, but they have a priority list, and that's what they'll be doing. So we've submitted a proposal, and it was just accepted yesterday, actually, to the state of Michigan to evaluate the economic impacts of that program. So I think that'll be another study that we can look to about these land disposition tools to see how effective they are. And that's the last slide that I have. This is my contact information if anybody needs to get in touch with me. And I'm hoping that we can have a conversation now. Dan, I left the maps out in my car to do that green zone study. So I could go and grab those if you think that would be valuable.
Yeah, why not? I'm going to take just a short break or whatever.
Sure. I mean, if you have questions now, I'm happy to answer those and we'll grab those.
Probably a full day.
Yeah, I think. Well, I was in Detroit all day, so I'm
Oh my goodness.
our paths didn't cross very well because it would have been better if I was in Detroit earlier this week, but that didn't happen. So, do you have any questions? Quick questions before?
I have a question related to the analysis of the property. This is done after the collapse, right?
After what?
After the collapse of the houses, after the crisis.
Right.
Why it has been done during as a continuous process in the city?
Why haven't they done the
I
land
mean,
banking?
why they did this to evaluate the houses, taxes, okay? Why not, as a continuous process in the state, sorry, in the city?
You're talking about the study or the land banking?
I mean, because assessment of the property, I think there was a lack of assessment. Why there was no assessment?
Yeah, I think that they continually do assessments of property prices. I mean, that happens regularly. Is that what you mean?
But why didn't this research happen before all these prices happen? Couldn't such a research help, to prevent the recession to happen in this specific area?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were, and Jan, I don't know, maybe you know more about the subprime mortgage crisis, but I think there were a lot of people who understood what was happening. People who should not have been getting mortgages were getting mortgages. But that was the way that our system was set up, and the banks have a lot of power in the United States, and so they continued with that system far longer than it should have been continued. So we had a lot of people who could not afford the homes that they were living in. And yes, that was the problem. There may have been some research that was conducted about that early on to see, but they were just giving houses to too many people.
Excuse me.
Yes.
But when the crisis happened, people lost their jobs. That's why they couldn't pay their houses. I mean, as long as they were paying their mortgages, when they had jobs, they were paying them. I mean, was there a crisis in mortgage payment rates before the U.S. crisis 2007, 2009? This is a question.
Yeah, they're probably all connected, right? The loss of the auto industry in Michigan in particular led to a lot of job loss and a lot of people moving out and a lot of people not being able to pay their mortgages. That's true. But I think it was a nationwide crisis where people were not able to afford their mortgages and their property values were declining. So I don't know all of the reasoning behind
Maybe
that.
just the crisis, I don't know, maybe correct me please, but what I remember is that the crisis started from the housing market. It was not a big economic crisis that, you have a lot of job losses. The mortgage sector, faced the crisis, the banks go bankrupt, it raised a lot of questions, and then the whole trust in the economic situation declined, and then you have all the consequences. But it started from the housing market in the US.
So people would stop paying
Yeah.
their mortgage.
Exactly.
Right. Their house dropped below the mortgage values,
Mhm.
low water, right, or underwater. So then, no mobility. If you wanted to move to get a new job somewhere else, or
So there was a crisis bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was increasing for too long past it.
some people say they warned, there were warnings, but we were ignoring it. So, and then since then, it's become much more. There's more vetting when you get a mortgage, and if you've got mortgage
Yes.
since then.
No, I was just saying that we're buying a house right now, and so we had to put a down payment down. When I bought a house in 2006, I didn't have to put down a down payment. They split the mortgage into two, so an equity and a prime mortgage. And now you have to show that if you lost your job, you could pay your mortgage for 6 months until you find a new one. That was new.
Right,
I
there's
don't
a
know.
lot of new requirements.
There's a lot of different groups. And I think that that's been good because we're, not selling houses for people who can't afford them. And I think there was a lot of, I don't know if people were
There's
doing
no document loans. And I did one of those ones.
Yeah.
I practically had to say nothing. You get a loan.
But they're saying at the same time, especially here in Michigan, that the developers couldn't get loans to develop housing. It's really hard even for people who can afford them to get them. And so that's contributing to the recession because it wasn't helping with the
Construction
economy.
workers stopped working. And even the utilities, actually, like water utilities, they make a certain amount of money off of the construction business. So it had that whole rippling effect through every sector. But, it was very much a housing crisis. Hopefully we learn. But we sometimes have short memories, right?
Well, one of the things that we've seen that was a good thing out of that crisis was the end of sprawl, as we call it. So, and we've had a lot of that, especially here in Michigan, people moving out of the urban centers, like we talked about earlier, moving into the suburbs, building huge, what they call McMansions, that they couldn't afford, and then obviously lost during the housing crisis. Well, when the recession happened, people stopped building. And, the farther that they build out, the less affordable that becomes because everybody has to drive into the city. So, and they're using up farmland and all of this other rural space instead of densifying the cores. And then, as we talked about, that the cores emptied out, people couldn't afford their bills, the utilities and the taxes become higher for the people who remain because they are a smaller population. So the end of sprawl was actually good, but I think we are seeing a return to sprawl. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Developers are doing jobs now that were in the system before the crisis, and now they're just going back to that work. They don't know how to build density in the cities. Redevelopment in the cities is more expensive, so there are a lot of contributing factors. But I hope that we learned from our mistakes, but I think that remains to be seen. We're just not coming out of the recession.
Who really controls the boundary of a city? Because as far as I understood, it's not really controlled because there are different municipalities and everyone, trying to get more investment for itself. So it just expands and expands. Isn't there any regulation in the US to set a boundary for a city that after this you cannot go any further?
Well, there
They
are
get
some
to decide.
some cities do, right? So is it Portland? They have a very famous one. But cities in Michigan do too. Ann Arbor has one. So they won't allow the infrastructure to be extended beyond the urban service boundary, right? So that somewhat discourages the development outside of that boundary. It's been fairly effective in Ann Arbor, but of course some of that could have been the recession too. But they were trying to preserve farmland because there was a lot of farmland around the city, and I'm probably in addition to keeping utility costs low, but yeah, it's not a federal thing.
That's right. Now, like under federal law, it's hard to create a new water system. And with all this sprawl over the 50s, 60s, we created all these little water systems. So any developer could go out to anywhere, drop a new system, build a bunch of houses, start a water system, and then they would, basically abandon them. So that's how we ended up with 60,000 systems in this country. 65. At one point, we had, I want to say, I think it's just now under 50. When I first started studying the industry, there were 65,000 water systems. Now, most people are served by good systems. 10% of people are served by, or maybe 90% of people are served by 10% of the systems. But that sprawl happened. Well, now, if you want to create a new water system, you have to demonstrate financial, managerial, and technical capacity. So if the city won't take you and you can't prove to the federal, that's going to put a stop to some of that too. So if you can't get water in particular, sewer probably as well. It's just harder to get the permitting now. They don't want all those other systems. So in a weird, it's not deliberately to control. No. It's for environmental and public health reasons, but it's because they don't want systems out of compliance that can't keep the system sustainable. So it forces those developers to work with the existing cities.
So it has a second benefit.
Yeah.
Although I find that sustainability has, that kind of flavor. If you do one thing for sustainability, you tend to affect some other sustainability factors.
I got a question. If we take a property from the downtown in Detroit, not this part that is so low value, but this space that is like alive.
Yeah.
And if you could compare the price of these properties with other properties in other cities similar in Michigan, how big is this difference?
Between Detroit and other cities in Michigan?
Yeah, the property that in downtown, is.
I think now it's quite a bit higher. I'm not sure that I can tell you exactly how much. If you compared it to another city like Chicago or San Francisco, it would be far lower. But I would say Detroit's rents are higher than any other city in Michigan in the urban core.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
right. So it's interesting, I started mentioning the reason I was in Detroit today is that we've been doing a study that we call Walkable Urban Places, where we're looking at an entire metro region and trying to identify the places that are walkable and also regionally significant from a commercial standpoint, and then comparing them to other places in the region to see does that walkability contribute to higher GDP and higher educational attainment. So we're finding that in some cases it does, but in Michigan I think it's taking longer. What they found in other cities is that those walkable urban places, they represent maybe 1% of the land, but they have the most development, they have the most people, they have the most employment. So they're really the economic engine of that whole metro region. And that, we hope, is the trend that's happening in Michigan. We're seeing that in Grand Rapids to be true, although not to the extent of some other cities like Boston. And Detroit is having a bit of that happen as well, where there's more development in the downtown that's in the areas where there's already some infrastructure and already some vitality. Shall I go out and
Sure.
to talk about this issue of vacant property in what we call legacy cities? They're the industrial cities that used to have a large population due to the industrial sectors in their cities, so automotive in Michigan in particular. And they experienced a lot of population decline over a very short period of time, so that's part of the legacy issue. And then the main legacy issue is that they have this infrastructure that's built for a much larger population. So Detroit was built for a population of 2 million at one point, was that the peak? And then around 1960, there was a lot of what they call white flight, where white people were leaving the city of Detroit and going into the suburbs. And so they left this infrastructure for 2 million people, and now I think they're like 700,000. Is that right? So that's what they call the legacy, because the people that continue to live there are the ones who bear the cost. Can I get an extra copy of the map? So this is the city of Saginaw. This was an exercise that we used in the workshop that we did. There's
Water.
Oh, wow.
basically this exercise was to help us to think a bit about what's going on above the ground in terms of the vacant property, and then what's going on under the ground, or the roads, in terms of the water and sewer infrastructure in those neighborhoods. This is an area of, well, they called it Genevaville, but this is an area of the city of Saginaw here in Michigan that experienced a lot of population decline over a short period of time. And this is called the green zone. Because they have such a high rate of vacancy in this neighborhood, they, at this point, are turning it green. And so they're not trying to redevelop some of the houses in the area. They're encouraging large blocks of land where there are no more houses to become green space. So different types of green space. It could be park, it could be, I don't think they're doing any farmland in Saginaw. But it helps with the underground water recharge. It helps with greening the space and making it look nicer for the people who continue to live there. And then it helps with not having to maintain that infrastructure. So in some cases, they're letting the roads just crumble. What we're trying to do with this exercise is look at what's happening above the ground. And so in this map, the colorful one, not the blue one, the yellow and green one, we see that the occupied parcels are the yellow ones, the vacant parcels are kind of the taupe color, the tan color. And so you can see there's a ton of vacancy in some of these blocks in the neighborhood here. This is actually fictitious. I'm not sure that the vacancy actually lines up to what it is. But what they'd like to do, or what we'd like to do in this exercise, is overlay it with the water infrastructure, which is on the blue map. You can see in the on the right-hand side the different types of infrastructure, the hydrant lines, and so that's one of the big problems in Michigan cities and maybe in other cities. When they want to shut down infrastructure like this, water and sewer, one of the problems that they have is that we've created this system of hydrants for putting out fires. And so they have these hydrants where the fire truck can come up and hook up the hose and put out the fire. And they don't want to shut down the water because there could still be a fire in some of these existing homes. So that's one of the reasons we're having trouble with shutting down some of the systems. The other issue, and Jan can explain this better, is the flow issue, where you have to have a certain amount of volume flowing through the system in order for the sewage to work right.
Right. You don't want a lot of stagnant, or terminal endpoints throughout the system. As I understand it. Again, I'm not an engineer though, but yeah. But it's very expensive. There's diseconomies in distribution, right? And those are aggravated when you don't have anybody there using the water. You can create stagnant.
You have to keep the pressure high, I think. And as you expand the network, then the price to keep the pressure high in a large network is getting higher than that.
Exactly.
You remember the guy from Veolia talking for the health and sanity issue, you have to have a positive pressure always.
Exactly. You don't want any infiltration into the system.
Right, so that was the main question that we wanted to answer here is, first of all, in terms of the neighborhoods that have high level of vacancy, what do we do with those? Do we turn them green? Do we try to redevelop them? And I think the hardest ones are the ones that are like 50-50. There's 50% of the parcels are vacant and the other 50 are occupied. So in some cases, like with the land bank, they've been doing side lot programs. So if there's a vacant property next to you, you can buy that property to make your property bigger. They've got garden programs, so they've got a little pocket park for the neighborhood. You can put together a few different parcels. So those are some ways that those properties can be reused for a useful purpose, but obviously at a much lower density than what it used to be. And then there are neighborhoods or blocks where you could actually put structures on the other parcels and create that density. And so that's one of the major things that these 16 cities that are getting the blight elimination funds right now are trying to decide, like, which neighborhoods are going to benefit the most from removing the blight, and what do we do with those properties after we remove the blight? Should we put another house there? Is it dense? Would that make a lot of sense? Or should we let that block go vacant? And just as people leave the homes, we take them down and we turn it green. there's a lot of issues involved in that. Probably some of you understand the legal issues involved with that much better than I do. But you can't force people from their homes. There may be ways to buy them out. Some people don't want to. They've lived there for 3 generations. They don't want to leave their homes. So
That
there are a lot
ended up
of
being a
those.
much harder part of it, didn't it?
Yeah.
Because people said that people don't want to move. It's a sociological, cultural problem. Older people especially, but it's their home. It's all they know. So even that you can offer them a trade, like, oh, move from here over to here, so you can cluster new people together. They don't want to leave their neighborhood, right?
Yeah, so that is one of the other programs is to try to densify. So find some area of the neighborhood where you can move everybody if they're going to go. Or give them first right on a new apartment building or something like that where they could have higher quality of life and still give them the public services.
But which policies there are right now to densify the city or some place? There are some policies that you are.
Well, I don't know if I'd call them policies. So the city of Detroit has developed a strategic plan where they've identified parcels that they want to be dense and they want to have development there. And then they've identified parcels that they call green something or other. Or they want it to go vacant. So they want to do the urban gardens. You guys had a tour with Greening of Detroit.
Yeah.
But they've been very targeted in terms of which parcels they're going to turn green and which parcels they want to keep developing. But this strategic plan I don't think has any teeth, right, Jan? It's just it's a vision. But but the city of Detroit has not accepted it as a policy yet, I guess I would say. So there's another hurdle there. But I do think that they're moving in the right direction with that. So yeah, there could be policies that would lead to that. So the other issue is with, we had this long conversations about what do you do with the infrastructure? Do you just leave it in the ground? Do you shut it down to certain blocks where there aren't enough people? Do you decommission it? Do you take it out of the ground? Do you reuse it for something else? Can you use some of the tunnels to run broadband through or something? Or use some of the sewer infrastructure for stormwater management. So those are some of the questions that we faced with this exercise. And then there were some people at this program who were very innovative, talking about, well, we have to provide the service, right? So we have to provide water, we have to provide sewer, but we don't have to do it with this infrastructure. We could have septic systems for our community. We could have water treatment systems in the neighborhood or in the house that would allow them to have the water that they need without having this huge expense. And so you may be aware of some of the other innovative options for that. So I guess that's the exercise that I was hoping we could kind of go through here, is to take a look at these overlapping layers of land and infrastructure and try to determine, what areas could be revitalized, what areas are probably not going to make it and we should turn green. There were some interesting things, like there's a church in the middle of this neighborhood, and it's very, it's a place where people gather, and so, cutting people off from the church would be a bad thing. So there's a lot of social aspects, there's economic aspects, there's policy, legality that we have to consider. So the scenario or the exercise that we did, we talked about how the different agencies would be involved in this conversation. If we brought everyone into the room to talk about this, allowed the residents to have a say in it. We obviously have to have the public works there. We need to have the planners there as well, utilities. So what agencies or professions do you guys represent, and have you had to face these kinds of issues, or do you feel like it's a conversation in your communities where all the parties are involved, or do you think that the public works agency makes decisions on their own and the planning department makes decisions on their own and they don't talk to each other? That happens a lot. Does that happen in your cities too?
Yeah, that's a
Where they don't talk to each other?
problem right now
is like the public service is management, but an institute, a national institute, and the local government we don't talk
Yeah.
with them, so sometimes it's difficult.
Do you think it's a cultural thing or a they
Corruption, I think.
coercion?
You know, they do this the public service when they think that it's gonna be like a good urban development. So the other sector that probably need to, they don't care about.
They don't invite them to
Yeah.
the conversation. I think that happens somewhat here too. There's a requirement that there's public notice about developments and other things that are going to happen to the land, but very few people actually attend the meetings or sometimes even see those notices.
I think that in terms of the administration, at least, judging from Athens where I'm from, there's still an old style division of the departments. So you create silos anyway from the way the administration is divided. To give an example, if you have the department of waste collection, let's say completely set, and the Department of Urban Works and the Department of Greening and Environment as three different things, then you create silos and have to add an additional effort and resources and time to bring them together to respond to the modernization, let's say, of the waste collection process and the uses of land that are used for collection for waste deposition, to give an example. And then people, I think that there is a change in that because of the crisis. People became a bit more active at the urban level, and in the city we try to test different methods of participatory. I don't want to call it governance because I think we are very far away from that, at least of participatory methods of giving a say to the people. So now we'll do it. So we will do it in a month. So we'll do a kind of a conference where we'll invite different actors. For now, they want to have been active. We have selected 6 or 7 issues, but they're not necessarily big apart from one, because we want to test the process. And we want to locate the actors that they're active at the neighborhood level. And we have a civil society, deputy mayor, which is new for Greece. So we will see. I think we are.
But then when you have too much participation, it's a problem too.
To be honest, I think for me,
it's like, come on, no, I can't do it.
For me, what we will do, I don't know if it will be successful or not, but it's not going to be, in the end, the decision was taken, it's not going to be a public event in the sense of, at least for now, I mean, people, the general public will be involved after 6 months when we will repeat it. We will try to create different methods of participation. So in this sense, we have 4 buildings that we will do an online system basically, and we will work with the community groups about the use of the 4 buildings. That's a different project that we're doing, which is only for what you want to do with these 4 buildings. This one we propose give us what we will see again for Greece, for Athens is new. I mean, it's nothing innovative, but that was not the case before. The other thing is a bit more issue-based. So it would be also an opportunity for the mayor to say, hey, I know that you are all concerned about what will happen with the National Garden, which is a big park. And I know, there's been a fight over the issue, so let's bring the actors together to discuss, or present his point of view and have of issues. So it's a two-way kind of thing. So it's not greatly democratic. It's a control. But this is also to acknowledge that there has been this change, that people are more concerned to take part more actively at the local level.
so do you think that, like you said, the methods of engaging them would be different across different demographics? So for instance here, our older populations are more interested in coming to a public meeting and talking about it, whereas our younger populations may be more likely to respond by social media.
Yes.
So,
I think they should be. I mean, I think it's our obligation to do it. So I don't know how it can be done. I would put, for example, my recommendation for them, but you can use different consultation tools. But I think it's a matter of its administration. I think we do a different thing. It's very easy to leave on the side.
Yes, for sure it's so.
but
And
unintentionally.
But the difficult thing is,
To involve.
yeah, and how to involve.
And it takes a lot longer, and there's higher
Yeah.
transaction costs, yeah. And sometimes it's hard to get people to see the value of that. And this is interesting too, because we're talking about interdisciplinary cooperation. We also have issues with interjurisdictional cooperation, where two cities, right next to each other, usually a city and a township, can't talk about, some land that they kind of share that's next to each other, or they both provide fire and police service. When if they provided it together, they could do it more efficiently. So some of our communities, and again, that's been the silver lining of the recession, they're doing so badly that they're losing staff, they're losing budget, and so one way that they are able to maintain services is to work together and provide it from an interjurisdictional basis. So I think in some ways, economic crisis can lead to better collaboration, but it's kind of scary that you have to get there before people will cooperate.
Yeah, but it puts all this pressure so that the privatization people say the same thing, right? That, because they're under fiscal pressure, then you should privatize, So everybody's like, they get special interest in politics center into it, right? And so those are very diametrically opposed recommendations in some ways, right? But we had a conference last week. In fact, one of the participants you'll meet in Chicago, Jenny, and the whole purpose of that conference on sustainability was to try to get social science to do a better job talking to the engineers to help them think about these questions a little bit more deeply, because we all come from the paradigm, the silos, you've heard that a lot. But yeah, it's not like that there's a right answer, but I do think you're right that necessity has forced people to open their minds a little bit more to regionalization. Why does everybody have to have a library system, a police system, an emergency response system when they're right next to each other? Water systems, certainly. Sewer, for some reason, is more regional. I don't know why, but we have way fewer sewer systems in the country. That's considered you collect it, you treat it centrally, and the economics of that are pretty well recognized. But a lot of systems want their own water system, and it goes back to something Mary Beth was talking about earlier, and you were about that control over the land boundaries. If you control the services, you control the growth, right? You control. They use water systems to do that, so they don't give that up as easily. We're sewer, and you can have it. They call it the dirty water people the clean water.
So what challenges do you see in terms of maintaining infrastructure in this neighborhood? Do you think, for one thing, there's a cost associated with everything, right? Except maybe letting the infrastructure go fallow or not using it. But there's probably costs associated with that too.
Yeah.
And there's an opportunity cost, right? So if you ever redevelop that area, you wouldn't be able to use that infrastructure because you haven't maintained it. But what other challenges do you see? For one thing, paying for it, that could be a huge problem. Like who pays to repurpose or remove or
Decommission. Oh, and somebody's going to come talk about Rex. He's going to talk about his proposal for that. And here's some innovative ideas related to, the cost of my term decommissioning, as we say in utilities, but it's true for land use too, right? And so, how could you obligate somebody if they're going to develop to take responsibility when it's at the end of its life? He's gonna talk about that next week, I know.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, any other innovative solutions that you know about?
For example, we don't have to pay public service. You know, in Venezuela is like the president, like 3 or 4 years ago. There is a law that if I don't pay, you can cut the service because it's a public service. But nowadays, to maintain and the quality of the service is deficient. Is really deficient. So
I think some of that went on in the city of Detroit recently too, because they shut utilities off for people who really needed them.
yeah,
So yeah, there was an uproar. You can't shut that off. It's a public service. But the public services, is it paid for through taxes or utility fees or?
no, you don't pay. There is like a little bit. You have to pay. I don't know, like $1 by month. The water service. Yeah. But even if you don't pay, it's okay.
It's still good.
Yes. So
So how do
right now it's like electricity is the same. You don't have to pay.
So how do they maintain it then? What's the funding source?
National fund.
So, but probably from taxes then.
Probably from that.
Not
It's a
always.
law.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
You have it.
But
Theoretically, we don't pay taxi for that.
how long can you sustain?
That's my point. It's not sustainable because 4 years later you see that it's not working.
I think that is we have to make a difference between one public service and another one. This is not the same like the street lights than the water. The water is a right. So I think it's in Mexico we have kind of differences. If you don't pay the electricity, they should. But if you don't pay the water, in some places like a reduction. You know, there is in some places in my country they have a reduction, so you receive it, but in the
Flow restriction.
So it's like
Yeah.
Flow restriction, which is what I think they should do it in Detroit. to be
because
honest.
it's a
It's
right.
very rare in the U.S. I've only known, I haven't looked at it in a long time. I knew one system up in the Northwest that used it at one time because it's considered very draconian, very, but I don't know why. I still think it's better than turning it off. You can fill baby bottles. You can flush the toilet a couple times a day. It's a very uncomfortable way to live, but you at least maintain a basic level of service. And I tend to think this is a much better solution.
Yeah.
And also when they shut off, they tend to break valves, and it ends up, costing now there's also a $500 plumbing repair that has to be done. And so utilities generally really don't like to shut people off. That's a myth, that they somehow would enjoy that, right? It's horrible. And with more, with the smart meters and some of these new controls, you can actually try some new things. You can have prepaid service, which sometimes low-income people do pretty well with that, especially if you give them some assistance, right? You give them a card and some help. Then they can ration their usage themselves over the month, same with electricity. So if you feel that that's fair and that's a political decision, then that's an option too.
No, but I think it would be interesting if there was somebody, or there are any studies to, like the one you think, for example, how much the impacts to the value of the house. For me, it would be interesting to see a study on how much we are actually prepaying. You see, for example, the utility of the water or the electricity on your bill, because I believe that most probably what we pay every month, let's say when we pay, is more expensive than the actual consumption. Plus, I mean, in Greece you pay a number of taxes on it. So in reality, electricity and water is quite cheap, but what you pay at the end is a little bit more expensive because you pay a number of taxes. So there must be some kind of correlation of how, anyway, companies kind of factor in the fact that this is a public good and what is the correlation with the other taxes you pay. So let's say I don't pay for a year. My question is, have I paid already in reality or not? So I think there's, it would be interesting to have data.
Yeah, Jan's going to talk about pricing tomorrow, aren't you?
Yeah, but that's a really, we're learning so much more about how people respond, Like you mean having some actual empirical data, how they...
Having a data, yes, empirical on basically, if I pay my water bill for a year,
Yeah.
whether I have actually prepaid for some months as well, because the value of the water that I consume, the absolute value of the water every month, might not be the same. I don't cost necessarily the same as, let's say, different.
We try to align the whole theory of full cost pricing is that they're fairly closely aligned. It's never going to be perfect, but that if there's a change in cost up or down, we try to change the rates pretty quickly to reflect that, so you don't build up an overpayment or an underpayment. That's what regulators are supposed to guard against. So this is a really important question. We'll talk about it a little tomorrow.
And this question I also have, isn't there any cross-subsidizing, in infrastructure in the US for the water? Is it really the tariff really covers all the costs for the operation maintenance or no?
That's the preferred policy.
Yeah, but is it happening?
It has to, with the private systems it does, because they have no other place to go. They have to support operations entirely by.
And they don't, beg the federal government or the state government that we cannot cover.
No,
So
they might get, especially if they're a small system, they might be eligible for some revolving loan funds at a slightly lower rate. But frankly, debt has been so cheap that's kind of irrelevant now. Anyhow, that and the paperwork is a big pain, so a lot of the privates don't bother. But generally, yeah, there our preference in the water profession. This for a living is full cost pricing.
But for me, this doesn't necessarily make sense. I mean, if we accept that water is a public good, the idea behind public goods is that partly you pay for them through your taxes. So what do we get in the end from our taxes? You see what I mean? If you don't get water, because when you give taxes, then you have the government that has this amount of money and chooses where to spend them. And then, in a country like Greece, I don't know if you know, but in relative terms, so not in absolute numbers, but in relative terms, at least some years until before the crisis, I don't know if it's now, we were the second country in the world in terms of how much money we spend in army after the United States. So in Greece, we spend a lot of money on army expenses. So why shouldn't that go to water? If it's a public good, I mean, otherwise it's not a public good.
Well, and I'll talk about that a little bit. We generally don't define it as a public good, even though it's acknowledged that it has significant social dimensions and I will be the first to argue, very significant positive externalities. So that's why we don't want to shut people's water off, right? But we treat it like we do generally other utilities. We try to price it, and we actually have a separate category of goods, and I'll get into that tomorrow. But we do it primarily for environmental management, because if something's free or cheap, do we conserve or do we waste?
But it's not cheap if you've already paid for your time.
But we try to set the price according to your usage. And the other issue, going back to your first important point, is that water for drinking, for survival, for a humane existence, that I believe that is a human right. Personally, those are my values. Watering the lawn is not a human right. And the lawn is the biggest crop in America. And it's potable water for the most part.
And from that, we can pay more.
And that's, so we try to
They're
price it
selling
correctly. Right. And so the question is, should we set a tariff so that it captures those differences in usage and elasticities and so on? And then the low-income family, we figure out a way to keep their service on, and maybe through our taxes, we give them a voucher or a payment assistance plan or whatever, which we do to some extent for energy. We have this, in the US, there's something called LIHEAP, the low-income heating, I always mix it up, but heating and energy assistance or something program. We have something called the Universal Service Fund for telecommunications, because a lot of low-income people, that's their only computer is their phone, or their ability to get call the fire department or whatever. So we as a matter of mostly informal, but to some extent formal policy, have that, as does the EU now, is full cost pricing. It has a full cost pricing, whatever they call it, policy statement or something like that, right? That's what they support. But if you go there, you have to recognize that, again, these services have this regressive effect on people. So we have to understand. But the issue is, how much do you try to use utility rates for redistributive policy and social policy and taxation policy versus separating those and figuring out a way to, get that to work. Same with housing, right? It's the same kind of issue. Like, how much do you try to do through the marketplace than trying to tax system?
Right. So who pays for decommissioning or even stopping certain infrastructure, right? I mean, in some ways, the people who live there are subsidizing that infrastructure already because they don't have the full population that used to support it. So sometimes when there's new infrastructure put into a community, they do a special assessment, and then everybody in that community pays more taxes. But you would have a hard time doing it in this neighborhood where there's all this vacancy and very few people, and a lot of them are probably lower income to begin with. Right. So how do you pay for it? This
is the worst case scenario when everybody's poor. As you know, if you have a city that's diverse, or a country, or a region, if you've got diversity of economic activity, of income, of wealth, it gives you some breathing room to price things, right, and cost things out, and tax, and distribute. And the problem we've always had is, with water systems, sometimes you've got just a little tiny system in the middle of nowhere, in Alaska or down by the Colonias, and the borders, and everybody's poor, and they've got arsenic in the water. But the thing is, under U.S. law, we don't want those kids born there to have different water than a kid born here in East Lansing. We don't think that's right. So we set the standard when we have to figure out a way to subsidize them. In some cases, you simply have to subsidize. Once you make that determination of a value and a right, that's exactly the time I think you use the tax dollars and subsidy. You just make that decision, right? Some people don't want to admit to it, like they just want the market to always solve everything. Right?
Tomorrow I have a lot of questions on water because I'm a little bit confused how you can really do full cost pricing on water. Because I was thinking that technically you have water resources and then it usually needs a level of aggregation, but it's interesting. Tomorrow we will ask.
And I'll give you the simple answer now. Here we mean strictly the accounting costs. What they actually pay. So we do not try to account for externalities. We do it to some extent in rate design, but it's strictly counting up your bills and have a budget, and that should go, including your capital and your operating costs. We actually have a very established system for that.
So Jan, how is it then that so many water systems have this infrastructure that they haven't maintained to the point where they're just doing emergency repairs?
Exactly, because they haven't been. This is where you see a very big difference between private and public utilities. And so again, I'm talking about this mostly. I'm coming from the regulatory perspective. That's what I mean when we've got it a little more figured out. But the privates have a strong incentive to invest because that's how they make money under the model. So they're not a problem. In fact, with them, we're worried they'll build too much infrastructure. They'll build as fast as they can because that they make profit. And I'll show you how that works tomorrow. The cities put it off because they don't want to raise the rate, and like you said, they let it go. Now this may have worked to their advantage somewhat because all of a sudden demand has fallen so much per capita, not just due to the population loss, but the actual per capita demand is up. So there's opportunities to resize some of that system or even avoid treatment plants. But yeah, they've avoided it because there's no legal standard like for how much water loss you will tolerate. There's a professional standard of about 10%. And so systems above 10% know that they've got a bad reputation. That would include Detroit. They're probably losing 30 to 40% of their water in Detroit. It's bad. And not only that, they're pumping continuously, going back to the pumping issue, because they don't have a lot of gravity helping them. They don't have a lot of above ground storage. So to me, the electric utility ought to be down there plugging water leaks. I say that every chance I get, trying to get somebody's attention because it's just such an immediate need, and it's a no-brainer. It's better than putting up windmills, just go plug some leaks in this system, but you're raising just an excellent point. Until bad things happen. See what happens in a gas utility, it blows up and somebody gets killed, or in electric, the power goes out, right? What happens in the water system? We don't know that there's thousands of gallons leaking under us. Unless a sinkhole opens up, unless something or the fire department goes out there and finds they have no pressure when they're trying to, So yeah, when the main breaks, that gets your attention. But a leak, they just let it go. And to be honest, there's actually some systems where they actually know and they kind of watch it and they wait for it to break because that's actually that's not always a bad policy, believe it or not. It sounds like it is. It sounds like preemption is always better. But if you talk to the water manager, including the one in Lansing, they call it run to fail. He says, I could charge you $2 more a month now on your bill, and we'll fix it ahead of time. Or I could wait till it breaks, and it'll cost $1. We'll send a crew out there. They actually have contests. When a water main breaks, they have contests of changing it out while it's under pressure. Like they have crews, and they win prizes for. Yeah, so at the AWWA, American Water Works Association meetings, they'll actually usually have a demonstration. They have teams from different cities that compete on how fast they can, because it'll be, your water source might be out for half a day. So even though, I don't want to overstate this, because a lot of times preemptive maintenance is definitely the way to go. Like when you're describing going into neighborhoods and renovating, you should be doing everything, electric, gas, water. The water and sewer are the furthest down, right? So, sewer, water, gas, electricity cables, if you've got them underground, and then the communications cables and stuff like that. So you want it coordinated, like we talked about some of that, I think, in that group. But you don't, doing everything 100%. There's actually cost curves, you know what I mean, like optimization curves. And Seattle does wonderful work in this area where they actually say, what's the optimal level of repair? The other thing is if you do it all at once, you could burden your customers. You want to spread it over, if you can, again, the social aspect is spread the cost to some extent and finance it over time so that you don't, so your bills don't all of a sudden go, double, triple, just to repair a bunch of water leaks. And if the water's cheap,
yeah.
But it's
I was wondering why in some, maybe because the leaks, some are vacancy with a high water consumption. So I think it's about the leaks or why is it? Because here are some places that it's not less, it's high, and it is empty. And
Where?
there's another. Have you seen it?
That could be like a commercial property or something, or
Yeah.
a golf
Well,
course.
while like I mentioned, this is a made up.
This is pretend.
So they had 3 different scenarios at our workshop, and one is real, and I don't know which one it is. So it may not be this one. But I do think that that could potentially be that there would be some water
It could be.
It's unaccounted for in a vacant property.
Yeah, I mean, you could, or I don't know. I thought these were supposed to be like enterprises or something, but I can't remember anymore like what they were trying to show there.
That was 2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think these were it was supposed to show just levels of activity. So my guess is some of these are commercial, were meant to represent commercial activity. It could be a shopping center or a restaurant or something that uses more water. Hospitals would use a lot of water, breweries, paper mills.
Maybe it has been recently. This is occupied empty recently, maybe.
Yeah, sometimes the data doesn't match, right? So
Because we're talking about the bigger area, or you're talking about some of these in the little areas.
yeah, there's some of those
There's
that,
some little
that
ones.
appear vacant here, but they have some water consumption.
Gotcha.
And it could be a data issue or.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I'm sorry,
And
I
this
wasn't
is,
matching.
3 years ago now too, so there's been a lot of change.
Yeah.
But yeah, a colleague and I are working on developing a model to see if we can help create a tool that would allow the planners to work together with the infrastructure folks to have a strategy that matches. So if they decide that they want this block to go vacant, then they can make a decision about the infrastructure that would be consistent with that. So we're using an index to evaluate each parcel in terms of whether the water could be shut off or not.
Yeah.
So, but I thought that was an interesting exercise, and there's so many layers to it. There's the cost, there's the politics, there's the effect on the user. It's really hard to deal with all those moving parts at the same time.
Yeah.
And really, the only way to do it is through collaboration. But if you don't have money, it doesn't matter. Do you remember anything else from that exercise that we went through?
No, but I mean, it's just so challenging because, like you said, certain solutions, you could go with like isolated, wells and septics or whatever, but then you're going to run up against state and federal environmental and public health regulations, which those are generally not preferred. Spent a long time trying to get people off of those and onto the water grid, right, so that they have safe water. I think it's just so vital to communities, and like that's why. I mean, I tend to agree that there is, even though technically water, is again, has these characteristics of certain kinds of goods. It certainly is like a number one thing you want for a community. You want a safe, reliable, healthy source. You want all the utilities, but water. You don't want people resorting to unsanitary conditions. We all know what cities had to deal with and how people had to live before they had these services. It was terrible. People got sick. That's not good. So why would we want to? It seems like a priority, right? We need to figure it out, but we want to do it in an environmentally sound way, and socially responsible way too. So,
What are the conditions of the water infrastructure like in your cities? Are they well maintained? I mean, if it's
In Dubai.
Uh-huh.
Dubai government is making money out of it. For residents, the rate of the consumption is lower than business. And Dubai is a business city. So the revenue are much higher than the cost.
of maintaining it.
On the other hand, UAE there is another grant is for the federal government, and this is fully subsidized. And especially for the locals, for the citizens, because the ratio of the citizens to the expats are like 1 to 10. So for the government to subsidize 10% of the population is not a big deal. So, but for the expat, they pay regular prices. So here, the government merely are breaking even on the cost and the revenue.
maintain them well then because they have the funds to do that.
And it's new. The network is very new.
Yeah. A few systems in the US make money from their water systems, but then they raise the question, yeah, they'll send money back to the general funds, and then the question is though, are they maintaining it correctly? So, you want the system to be sustainable and spend to the right level, and not overcharge.
I think that the data on the infrastructure is not very good still either. In some
It's terrible, right, it's terrible, and we don't know, and like I said, even the engineering society, tries to report current stuff, so it's based on certain assumptions, and it's a very static view. So I've been, like I said, kind of running around the last couple of years talking about how demand is changing. Why are you going to rebuild the system exactly the same way? It doesn't make sense.
Right. In some places they're digging up like wood.
Wooden pipes. You can find wooden pipes in the US in the Northeast. Not too often, but yeah, in Boston you can find them. And sometimes the old pipes last, 100 years, and it's the new pipe that breaks. You just never know. You never know.
So the future in last pipe, something like that, 3 or 4 days ago.
Did you?
But in Detroit, like infrastructure, there was photos of the pipes, and they had these, I don't know, it was like this, and the big grass.
Right. The
inside it.
It's all cruddy inside, so it's a much smaller diameter, which they don't need. That's one of my points. They don't need this diameter anymore.
So maybe that's a good.
And there's some real creative engineers that they model the systems, and they run these genetic algorithms to show how you could resize and what they would take this map and show you where you could abandon and upsize and downsize and spend. Maybe you thought you needed 10 million and you actually only need 7 or 6 million because you can actually make. But the traditional engineers, they want to build big and a lot, right? They want it right. They love to build stuff. That's their thing. So you have to. That's why you need to work with the social scientists and the other experts on sustainability principles. Sound good? Are you guys all? You had enough, right? Want to go out into the sunshine? You still get until 8 o'clock, so you still have 3 hours of sun left, light left.
Yeah.
Unless Mohammed's going to make you work some more.
Now we want to go to ice
Yeah. Next job is to find the ice cream shop.
cream.
Yeah. Do you need any other advice for tonight or the union? There's one in the union, yeah. And then there's one in Anthony Hall, which is more central. But they're both good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So tomorrow we are going to go to human ecology.
Yes.
That way.
Now, will the room be open?
I'll
You're coming?
I'm going to open the building and open the room.
Oh, that's right, because it'll be locked this afternoon.
Um,
Are you sure that's okay? Do you want to just leave it?
Compré otra en la
Well, I think we're going to come to campus anyway. There's a science festival going on for kids right now, so I'm going to bring our kids up.
But then please be on time.